Sometimes you look at guys and you just don't see the fuss. Other times you look at guys and you wonder why they're not getting more fuss. And a player that fits into the latter category for me is DeMarcus Walker from Florida State. When I was evaluating him, I was going into it thinking one thing and be like, okay, he's probably going to be a third round talent at best, maybe a fourth round type of guy. I don't really know. But as I started to watch, I started to like more and more of what I saw. And frankly, ended up coming away really impressed. And he ended up grading out much higher than I had ever initially anticipated or even remembered based off of previous year's play. To the point where I will advocate that this kid should end up going on Thursday night on day one of the draft. Will he? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But he probably should. Because I see a dude with some big time upside, and already in terms of his floor, I think he's got a pretty good floor for the NFL level. He's got good size, about 6'3", 275 pounds or so, decent height, decent length. He could put on additional weight and I think play defensive end in a 3-4 and be effective there. Right now, I think he could definitely play as a base end in a 4-3. Really strong kid too. And you saw this show up on film. He's got natural strength. He can really get offensive linemen off balance and potentially drive them back, especially when he's got a little bit of a head of steam. Um, Even sometimes when his pad level isn't great, he's got really good lower body strength to be able to continue to move, which is hard to do when you get borderline upright. I watched him a lot of times on film, and tight ends and running backs are just not going to be able to block him. And sometimes you'll see, even for some of the big time edge rushers, sometimes they get too easily blocked by tight ends and running backs, and it frustrates you. And you're like, they should not be able to block you. Well, I know with DeMarcus Walker, at least in college, they weren't able to block him. And he's a guy, too, that because of his strength and because of his size, on passing downs, you can even flip him inside in a 4-3 and have him give you some interior pass rush. He's a decent pass rusher. He's got an outstanding swim move. He's just explosive and violent with that thing. That's his go-to move. That's the move that's getting him to the dance. He's got a stutter step also that can really help get offensive linemen off balance. He does a good job with his hands in terms of creating an initial punch, again, getting offensive linemen off balance. One thing I would like to see him do for being a guy at this size that could play with this type of strength, I would like to see him be a little bit more effective as a bull rusher. And I would also like to see him add some secondary pass rush moves because it could help him, I think, as well with his ability to be able to bend the edge and wind off the edge because he's a guy that occasionally can do that. But I wonder how consistently he'll be able to do that at the NFL level, and will that potentially cap his pass rush potential? Very good run defender as well. Plays with really good discipline, holds the edge very well, sets the edge very well. He's good in lateral pursuit, a solid tackler. One thing about him in run defense, again, when talking about that less than stellar pad level, is that sometimes he can get a little too upright. Sometimes he can get driven back on his heels just a little bit. Um, Sometimes also it seems like with DeMarcus Walker that when he gets engaged by the blocker, there are times where he could work, frankly, a little bit harder to get off the block. So you talk about that can impact his ability to be a run defender and also a pass rusher as well, is that he needs to get better at shedding blocks. Like I say, he's got a great hand punch, violent, explosive, powerful hands that can really stick and shake blockers. But sometimes he can have a late burst off the snap, which really puts him in a bad position. Um, he sometimes, like I said again, he doesn't use the hands with terms of secondary moves. Like his initial punch is violent and great. After that, like I say, you just kind of get stonewalled a little bit, and you could just kind of be there. And you like to see him get better at that. I saw a guy though on film that has that football IQ that I really, really like. I think this kid has great football smarts. When he's not able to get to the quarterback, he is able to get his hands up in the throwing lane. Another thing, when I talked about his run defense, he's a really good run defender. He's a kid that I think holds and sets the edge well and maintains contain. He doesn't get overly fooled by read option type of plays, which a lot of, especially more explosive edge rushers do. He doesn't. He does a really good job of being able to stay disciplined and oftentimes reading the play correctly, which is a skill in and of itself. And when I think about DeMarcus Walker, here's a guy that played in a big time program, played in every game the last 3 seasons, no reports of any off the field issues of any kind. You know, and I look at a game like his game against Ole Miss in 2016. Now, granted, he wasn't going up against Larry Tunsil because he had already left to go to the NFL. But you're talking about still an SEC team with NFL talent, and DeMarcus Walker dominated. It was one of the single best performances I think there was in college football in 2016. What did he end up with? Like 4.5 sacks? Like when you go back and watch the film of that game, it's DeMarcus Walker left, it's DeMarcus Walker right, it's DeMarcus Walker down your throat and straight up your ass. He was everywhere. He was dominant. He took over. It was a special type of performance, and it was a special type of performance that can really, if you're not careful, get you uber infatuated with the potential, the possibility again of what could be for this kid at the NFL level. But with that said, though, just in general, I look at this kid. He was a productive player at Florida State, played at a high level program, and played at a high level himself for a couple of years, especially his last year in 2016. I look at this kid and I'm like, why is he not getting more buzz? Is it just because of the fact that people haven't watched him closely enough? Is it because of the fact that he's not super explosive off the edge, so he doesn't fit that more exciting type of profile? Is it the fact that he's in a draft class with Myles Garrett and Jonathan Allen and Solomon Thomas, and as a consequence, the next level of guys are going to fall behind in terms of how they're viewed? I don't know. But I know this kid can play. And I feel like this kid can play really, really well. And I feel like in this draft, even though I gave him a final grade of 89.5, I feel like at the end of the day, he's the type of kid, especially for a good team in the tail end portion of round number 1, he's a guy I want to gamble on because he's a really good football player with some pass rush potential and some positional versatility. I think of a team like the Dallas Cowboys, they should love to get their hands on a kid like this, even though he's not super explosive off the edge. A team like the Atlanta Falcons, I think he could do otherworldly things in lining them up all over the place on the defensive line as a Michael Bennett type of performer. At the end of the day, I think you'll be hard-pressed to prove to me that there are 32 better players in this draft than DeMarcus Walker. And I think that if he gets into the right system, which you could say about so many guys, but especially for him, and he comes in hungry and he makes the most of his opportunity, I think you're talking about a kid that can make a couple of Pro Bowl appearances in his career. I was really impressed with what I saw on film with him, and now I feel like he's one of the more unheralded, underrated prospects in the entire 2017 NFL draft.